All right, so we are taking notes today. We're going to begin section 2. And I'm hoping by this point all of you have had a discussion about what Wednesday will look like. If you look at, or if you scroll through, was it there? Okay. Hopefully you find it, honey. As you scroll through, if you looked at our Canvas homepage, you see that there is an assignment due on Wednesday. Please make sure that you're keeping track of all the things that you need to do on Wednesday. Essentially, Wednesday is just like a school day, except you're going to do it from home. No extra time, no, I don't have internet, none of this other stuff. You need to make sure if you don't have access to internet that you let your teacher or Dr. Jenkins know, making sure that you understand that if there's an assignment due on that day, it's due on that day. So please make sure that you're looking at all those things. We do have an assignment due that day. So you need to make sure that you get it turned in that day. If you don't turn it in, it is late. So please make sure that you're paying attention. I'm giving it to you today, but you won't be able to finish it today or tomorrow. You'll need that time period to get finished with it, okay? All right, so we finished art in the Paleolithic age, and now we're going to move into section 2. And again, remember, I kind of sort of follow the textbook, but this is not anything that we're just moving into a different time period. And now we're moving into our Neolithic age. Neo means new, so that abbreviation, N-E-O, anytime you see that attached to any other word, it always means new. So Neolithic age means new stone age. And remember, I already told you on the test, you're going to need to be able to say Paleolithic, Stone Age, Neolithic, New Stone Age. It's also really, 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 really important to note that it is also known as the Neolithic Agricultural Revolution. So remember, I told you something really, really important is going to happen around 8000 BCE. And around 8000 BCE, we discover the ability to grow our own food on purpose. So do we have any family farmers in the house? Family farmers, raise your hand high, proud. Any of you that have family farms? High and proud, because we've been doing one thing for the longest period of time, and it's growing food, agriculture. Since 8000 BCE, people have been growing food. So my family farmer people, you should be very proud of that family farm, because it is truly one of the most important advancements that will occur in the history of the world. So if I were to bring a whole bunch of historians, let's just say 10. If I were to bring 10 historians in here and say, you 10 smart people, list top 5 presidents, they would probably have about the same people, but they would all be in different orders. Or name the most important war that has occurred in the history of the world. One thing you should know about historians is none of them are going to say World War II, because why? Everybody knows World War II. They're going to pick some obscure war like the War of Jenkins' Ear, which is a real war, I promise, about a guy getting his ear cut off, because they want to pretend that they're smarter than everyone else. That's what historians do. But there would be one thing that I could ask them, what was the most significant event in the history of mankind? And they would say the agricultural revolution, this ability for people to grow food. And it radically changes the world as we know it when we are able to systematically plant, harvest, and I would underline the most important part of that, storing our crops. So we're going to plant things on purpose, we're going to harvest things, and then really, really, really important, we're going to store things. So if we store crops, what are we going to need first and foremost?
Grain bins.
What?
That's funny.
What'd you say?
I said grain bins.
Yes! It is. Buildings. We need grain bins. You thought you were being funny, but you said the right answer. It's just not called a grain bin yet. We need buildings. If we're going to store food, we need a place to store them. So let's think on this part. When you store something, what else do you think might be necessary around storing things that are really important? Yes. Security. Some kind of protection. That is essential. That becomes vitally important because if Mrs. Wagaman's tribe down at the end of the hallway isn't as productive as we are, it becomes a lot easier. It is a whole lot easier to develop weapons and take something than it is to plant, harvest, build, right? It's way easier to take. Not that you should ever do that, but if we think about that, it's way easier to take something rather than all the principles that go along with planting, harvesting, and storing. We also have to remind ourselves that we are doing this in a place that is a desert, less than 10 inches of rain a year. So we're not going to get adequate rainfall. So now we have to irrigate. So there's a lot of stuff that we're going to do. Our population for thousands of years, 90% of us are going to be farmers. 90%. Right now, I think, and anybody can correct me, that about 10% of our population grows plants and food for about half of the world in the United States. We've gotten so much better at it, but right now we aren't. So that again is why this is incredibly important. The ability to acquire food regularly gave humans greater control over our environment. So now, instead of being at the mercy of our environment, we can control what that means. And the first thing it's going to mean for us is we don't have to wander around anymore. We can stop being nomadic and depending on these migration animals to set up our communities. Humans also began domesticating animals, and domestication means taming animals to use for food, clothing, and work. Anybody want to guess what those first animals are? And they're not dogs and cats. They are not cows. They're not sheep. They're the most disgusting animals, and those of you that do them for 4-H, goats. Goats. Sorry, you 4-H people that love goats. Oh, goats. So let's think about goats.
You think goats are the most disgusting?
I think they're pretty gross.
You ever been to State Farm?
First of all, I'm never around animals because they frighten me for the most part. So I don't do animals. I got my dog and my cat, and other ones frighten me. So, but goats, ugh. But let's think about the idea of goats. Goats do a variety of things. We can get dairy products from goats. We can get meat from goats. Granted, they're scraggly looking hides. I always think they're scraggly looking, but all you people that love goats know that they have. We can use them for food. I think they're very hard to make do work, but I think eventually they could do work. They're small. They're not going to compete for food, which is why cows are not always the best answer. And goats eat just about anything, right? They have, so goats make a really good first animal. We also have a few bird-like animals that we can't domesticate as well, but we will use for food as we move forward. So we start to use animals in a way that will help us domesticate and use those for food. So we are slowly building, again, what leads us to a civilization. Historians believe, and I would put a giant box around this, that the Neolithic agricultural revolution was the single most important event in human history. And that is why, my family farmers, I told you to raise your hand high and proud, because what you do is the single most important event in human history. It changes everything about humans, their interaction with each other, and how we are able to stop moving. We now have the steps for creating civilization. So this agriculture is going to develop all around the world from about 8,000 to 3,000 BCE. That's 3,000 years, people. That's a lot of stuff. And our first crops that we are going to grow, wheat, which I'm fairly certain all of us know what wheat looks like, yams, which I think most of us know what those are, sometimes better known as sweet potatoes. Rice, most of us again know what rice is. Barley is a weird one. Barley is something that grandparents eat, or maybe your great grandparents eat, like barley soup or barley bread. It's a really dense kind of grain. The important thing about this wheat, barley, yams, and rice is storing property, right? You can store all of these foods for an extended period of time. You can trade these foods back with trading partners, and they are fairly easy to grow. All of those things are rice is not quite so easy, but the rest of them are fairly easy to grow, fairly easy to harvest. You don't need any fancy harvesting. What?
Every time we've ever planted barley, we did for a cover crop like 3 years in a row. It was like impossible.
Barley?
Yeah.
Is it impossible to harvest?
It would always get your header would always get clogged up. Right?
I think this is deserty area, and I wonder if that has something to do with it.
I'm talking like a week to get like 500 acres.
Yes, well,
We had to get it in like 2 months.
and I think because farming is highly advanced. No, I'm not saying you're wrong.
Yeah.
I think because farming is so highly advanced, a time period means something different now than it did then, right? These people have nothing to do but farm, right? You're doing it to make money. These people are doing it to eat, right? Do you see the difference? So your anticipation is a profit on this thing that you're growing, and if it takes that long to grow, then we're not doing it. Does that make sense? These people are just waiting around for food to grow. So, and I would suspect, again, I don't know anything about this, that there's lots of different kinds as well of barley to grow. But why these people grew barley is twofold. It's stored well. It could be made into a lot of things, and it grew well in the places that it was designed. So, second part of this conversation is where we're beginning to move with civilization. So this chapter 1, we start with, again, Paleolithic man roaming around in these little teeny tiny tribes. And we're going to end with civilizations and people building villages, and people building these villages around farming communities. Our oldest settlement in the whole entire world is Jericho. And those of you that are people that attend religious services on Sunday, you have probably heard about this little place called Jericho, and Daniel and the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. It's that Jericho. And again, that will be something I think for many people in your first experience in world history, that we do discuss things that you maybe have learned in a different setting here in school. And it is not, I know it feels weird, but the Holy Bible for the Christian faith is a secondary source, and it is has a lot of history that we talk about in class, one of which, the oldest settlement, Jericho. Largest settlement is Katal in Turkey, about 32 acres with a population of about 6,000. So one of the other hints for what Mrs. Norris will test you about is anytime I tell you something is the first, the oldest, the biggest, that is often testable material. So if I'm you, I would make sure that I know that Jericho is the oldest settlement in the history of the world. And I would also learn that the largest settlement was in Turkey, 32 acres with a population of about 6,000, which is larger than the population of Sullivan County. And again, these Neolithic farming villages, people grow and store their own food. So that, again, switches what everyone becomes, and people start growing their own food. As food production increases, second part, it's not necessary for everyone to grow food. So now we start again with job specialization. People can do other things besides farming, and it allowed people to become artisans, and then artisans will begin trading items for food and surrounding villages. So this becomes a system that allows us to get stuff that we don't and would not normally have. If we grow wheat and yams, and Mrs. Wagaman's village grows barley and rice, we can trade food or we can trade things. We can trade baskets. We can trade all different types of things that will allow us to develop our village better. All right, our next thing that we're going to look at is religion. And here's an important part that we need to make sure that we understand when we use the word religion. We are using the word religion, not faith. This is nothing that resembles anything that we can talk about in a more modern time. But for our purposes, what religion means and how we study it in this time period is the fact that these villages had buildings or shrines to gods and goddesses. You can't think of them as a church, right? No one's going in them. There aren't people worshiping in them. People are leaving sacrifices at them. But the reason we think of this in the way that we do historically is that we're going to have a group of people build a building, use resources that has no real purpose except to glorify gods and goddesses. So it tells us, again, as historians, that this was something really important to these people, that these buildings are giant, they're huge, many of them still stand in and around Iraq and Iran, and it tells us, again, the significance and importance of this idea of religion or these shrines, and if it helps you to think of them as shrines. Bricks will be built, so that means we got a whole bunch of people making bricks that you can't eat, right? You can't eat bricks. So that's the other part that we think about. Every time we take a group of people and do something besides grow food, we have to make sure that we understand that it is significant. And these shrines that they build to gods and goddesses, and all these different places are going to have different gods and goddesses, will be really important. So when we talk about the features of a civilization, and one of those features is religion, please, again, don't think of it in a modern term. There's no faith, there's no church type thing. We're talking about buildings and gods and goddesses and sacrifices, and don't think about human sacrifices either. We're talking about sacrifices like of the first harvest or any of those things. All right, our last look, we got two more. Sorry. Our last look today is at consequences. And we need to take a second, a pause, and make sure that we understand this word consequence. Is consequence a good word or a bad word? Does it mean good things or bad things? Okay, you guys always think it means bad. And it doesn't. A consequence is just a result. You think bad because for 10 years in school, the consequences of your behavior is detention, or the consequence of your behavior is you have to write sentences, or the consequence of your behavior is you lose recess, or maybe even your parents. The consequence of your behavior is you lose your phone. A consequence is a result. And so traditionally, your brain always goes to bad things, and that will really kind of hurt you in this class if your brain always goes to a bad thing when you hear the word consequence, because historically, consequences are good and bad. So make sure when I ask you the consequences of the agricultural Neolithic revolution, that one of the consequences is that we can grow food. That's certainly a positive. And for the consequences of the Neolithic agricultural age, most all of the consequences are positive. We have one glaring negative. But for the most part, we have positive consequences. So, brought change that affected the way that people are going to live for thousands of years. And this is why historians say this is the biggest change in the history of the world for human beings on the face of this earth. You'll find a lot of other people that will say it is also the most important thing for the earth itself, right? That we're going to drastically change the way that we use the earth. Created a need for permanent houses. So now we got to build houses. We have to build grain bins. We have to build protection. So all of these things have to be built. And again, we built them from nothing. We don't know. We don't know what a grain bin looks like. We know what security looks like, but we also understand that now we need to build these walls. And again, hopefully in that song, those of you that know the song, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. We built walls around cities for that protection. We also have to develop trade. So now we have to learn how to get along with other people to get what we need. And that trade will become really important because it will actually be a trade of things. I'm going to give you this and you're going to give me this, but it's also going to be an exchange of ideas. We're going to send traders out and they're going to come back with wives from other villages who will have other ways that they prepare food, who will have other gods that they pray to, who will have other techniques on how to farm. So we'll also use that trade to exchange ideas, which is vitally important. And then we have this job specialization that people will be able to become specialized in these other crafts that are necessary for us to survive. So, division of labor. You're going to grow food, I'm going to make pottery. And we both are acknowledged as being something that's helpful for our village. We build better tools, and then I would put an asterisk by crops to make cloth. This is one of the ones, excuse me, that's really important about how you establish where a society is at in its well-being. That you can take land and grow things that you're not going to eat. So, again, not that I am not agriculturally aware, like my family's from North Carolina, farms and all that stuff, although I didn't grow up there. My husband's from Southern California. And he gets none of this. He does not understand anything. He doesn't understand why people leave barns up to fall over. I'm like, you might think that barn is falling over, and yes, it looks like it's falling over, but I'm sure they're using it. He doesn't understand that. He doesn't understand graves in the middle of people's land, like California land. Nobody does that. Like you're buried 3 feet on top of each other. But when we first moved here, we live out at the lake, which is surrounded by cornfields. And he was so excited that we're surrounded by corn. He's like, you think we can go out there and nick some of that corn? I'm like, you might, but it won't taste very good. He's like, why won't it taste very good? I'm like, it's not food corn. He's like, what? It's not corn to eat. What corn is it? It's corn for animal feed. Like, what? That concept made no sense to him, that there would be acres and acres and acres and fields of corn to feed animals. People who live in town and cities don't understand that concept. Didn't believe me, 100% didn't believe me. And then when he saw the corn dying, like, what the heck is that? I told you, it's to grow, it's for feed, or it's to make tortillas, or it's to do anything else from ground corn, to make corn flour, whatever, but not to eat. So when you develop land to do something that you're not going to eat, it tells you that the society is highly evolved, and I'm going to use this term often, that they're big, fat, and happy. That we are not hungry, we have more than enough food, and so we can grow these crops like cotton that we can't eat as a crop that determines the success of our village. And that again will be really important as we go forward. So far, all of these things have been very positive. We do have a couple of negatives, and that will be the relationship between males and females. And I hope that you understood while we were Paleolithic man that I was stressing we were all equal. All of us equal. All of us able to make decisions, all of us hunting for food, and now that's going to drastically change because now we will set up a relationship between males and females that will no longer be equal. And this becomes this idea of males as head of something and females subordinate. So males become more active in farming and herding and protecting, and females become more domesticated, weaving, cooking, caring. And that again, if we think about a negative aspect of the revolution, that becomes one, in that we start to put people in places of whether some are more important than others. We're going to do it with men and women. We're also going to do it with skill sets. And eventually, because also as Paleolithic man, we don't have a leader. We don't have leaders. Everybody's a leader. But with these villages, we'll begin to assert that we need leaders, we'll need government, we'll need voting, we'll need all these different things that will then place people in a ranking system based on either their gender or what they can contribute. And then lastly, as wealth of village increases, we build walls for protection, and then we're going to form armies. Who's going to be in charge of the armies? How do we develop these armies? Where do we get the weapons? And then last but not least, big giant box, these villages are all going to be around river valleys. The cradle of civilization is going to be in Mesopotamia, in the middle of a desert that's not going to get more than 10 inches of rain. We're going to form them around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. No rain. So we have to find these rivers, and then we also have to learn the art of irrigation. We're going to have to irrigate because we don't have rain. And so those other crops will be essentially important that grow without a lot of water, except rice, which needs a whole bunch of water because you're planting that in the water. All right? So our assignment today looks like this, and it will be, what?
Is this the one we do Wednesday?
Yes. And it will look very different from, well, it will look very different, but it will start to look very familiar to you, is a Paleolithic and Neolithic chart. So again, I have a lot of stuff that I have to remember. And for me, I love a chart because I can put stuff in compartments and I can set things up. And when I need to recall, I can think about where it's at on that chart. So we do a lot of charts, sadly, because that's the way Mrs. Norris learns. But I try to throw some other stuff in there thinking that you might learn that way as well. So we have got our two different groups, Paleolithic and Neolithic. You might need to use the textbook for a little bit to answer some of these. It's chapter 1, section 1 and 2. Probably not that much. I think most everything is in our notes. But so you're looking at how Paleolithic man used the land to get food, and how Neolithic man used the land to get food. When I give you a chart, you can just bullet point answers in the each section. Dwellings are homes. Where do they live? Population. What were the size of the groups? The gender issues, conflict. What technology did they use? How did they use animals? What was their government like? And so what you will finish at the end, and this is why every time you see a chart, you will groan if you don't like to write, because the purpose of the chart is to move your information from your notes onto the chart, and then you got to write about it. So at the end, make sure you follow through with this and don't just turn in the chart, because a chart's not worth but about 10 points because all you're doing is moving information around. Answer the following question on the back of this paper. Again, this is from back in the paper day. Answer must be at least 2 paragraphs. 2 solid, good paragraphs, 4 to 6 sentences each. Push it on that 6th sentence. Your first paragraph should describe the Neolithic agricultural revolution. What is it? Your second one should explain what changed as a result of the agricultural Neolithic revolution and how it changed history. So the question is, why is the Neolithic agricultural revolution a turning point in history? That's what you're answering, okay? Questions about that? Questions? Okay. All right. We are done for today. Tomorrow we should be almost finished with our notes. We should finish our notes up tomorrow. This assignment is due on Wednesday, but you'll have the beginning of our features of civilization, and that will be our last stuff that we'll work on. Yes, sir?
Doesn't it automatically save?
It does. It should automatically save while you're in Cami. Javen, did you get that figured out at home, Cami?
Yeah, I got that done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else still having issues with Cami and getting Cami? Drew, you've already done it, right? Okay.